Welcome to the History Nerds United podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Today, author Gareth Russell in his book, The Six Loves of James I. Listen, a lot of people know Gareth or know of Gareth. All of them said, he's the best. You're going to have a great time. You're going to love it. And they were 100% correct. Gareth is awesome. I will say, I have never made a guest so uncomfortable with my first two questions. I think I saved it by the end. Hopefully, he will still talk to me after this goes out. But I do think I saved it. It was just amazing talking to him. He is who everybody says he is. And how about I shut up so you can hear how awesome he is? Let's bring on Gareth. And here we are with author Gareth Russell, The Six Loves of James I. Gareth, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Brendan.
Gareth, I'd like to start off with kind of a little bit of background. So as far as you are concerned, I have one very simple question for you. Why are you so beloved? And I'm going to explain why I'm asking this. There is two types of authors I've talked to. Ones that don't know you who say, Gareth, I don't know him, but everybody loves him. He's the best. Or, I know Gareth, I love him. He's the best. In fact, Tracy Borman said that you being a historian isn't enough. She thinks it's time for you to start stand-up comedy. How is this all happening, Gareth? Explain this to me.
That's very nice. I don't know how to answer questions about being beloved myself. Every urge in my body is flinching. I
like to make my guests as uncomfortable as possible. That's really what I'm going for.
You did it. This is, well, listen, I'm very lucky with the people I work with. And Tracy is fantastic, as I'm sure you know, Brendan, if you've interviewed her. So I think sometimes it's easier to flourish when you're in good soil, I think is the way I would look at it. So I'm lucky with the people who I've worked with so far. And I was asked yesterday at lunch, someone said, what popular historians do you know who are terrible? It's a short list. I was like, I've got.
Can I ask that on air now? Will you actually answer that?
There are none. No, they it was a short list because actually, to be honest, I think there certainly are some people who can be prickly. That's true of any field, but the overwhelming majority of people are really lovely and they love history and and that extends to readers too. It's so lovely, really, truly lovely when you get to spend your time meeting people and talking to people who have such a passion for this subject. So I'm very happy with what I do. Maybe that makes me slightly more. Maybe that helps explain why I get on so well with people, because I think we have very similar interests, and that's a lovely thing.
Well, now that I made you uncomfortable, I want to dig deeper a little bit into that.
Sure.
One of the first books back in the day that I reviewed was The Palace, your previous book.
Yes.
And you were one of the first authors, big-time authors, that liked it and followed me back on Twitter.
Was I?
Yes. So you are even nice to nobodies. That's why everybody loves you.
This is so painful, Brendan. Well, thank you. I mean, thank you for the thing is, though, I remember what it was like really, starting out. And I can, listen, no one can follow everyone, but I assume it was good. And I really appreciate, as in the review was, and I do appreciate the time people take to read it and review things, because the thing you're essentially doing as an author is that you're asking people to part with their time and their money, and neither of those things are infinite. They both have limitations, and they both are hard earned and easily spent. So I think if you're gonna, you should always be really grateful that people have spent either on you, and I am, because it's what my career is. So thank you.
Well, now that I've ensured you will never come on the podcast again, let's...
No, when you said dig deeper, I was like, this is like therapy. And, I don't have a drink. So...
You should have planned ahead. I got mine here. There's no alcohol.
I'm visiting a friend who makes cocktails. This is all on me. I literally had it on my doorstep. So anyway, proceed with the interrogation.
Let's talk about James now. I've done enough.
Sure.
But I do have to ask this. So in the US, it's The Six Loves of James I. Now in the UK, it's Queen James.
Yes.
Why the title change? And I'm just going to say it. Queen James is perfect. Why change to Six Loves?
So it's interesting. People have had quite strong reactions to it. And strangely, funny, a friend who's British emailed him saying, I bet the British publishers wish they'd gone with the American one, but other people have strongly preferred the British one. I like them both, which is a feeble sort of politician's answer, but it's true. But the reasons are quite mundane. So when the book was pitched, it was under the title Queen James. And I remember very early on the American team saying, I feel like we're going to have to put a subtitle, kind of the way it is in Britain, it's like Queen James, The Life and Loves of Britain's First King. And they weren't wild on doing that. They think they wanted something cleaner and a title that did the whole thing. When the book went in manuscript form a couple of years later, they came back and said, we think that this is as interesting and as important as The Six Wives of Henry VIII, which was lovely. And also, really, there hadn't been, for a long, long time, there hadn't been a publisher putting this many eggs in the basket in America for a member of the Stuart dynasty, as opposed to the Tudors. So when they decided they wanted to make it a Christmas release and all of that, it was really flattering. And so they said, is there anything that we can think of that maybe packs this punch, that we won't need a subtitle, be really clear who it is about, and that we think this story is as important, as dramatic as Six Wives of Henry VIII, and we came up with The Six Loves of James I. But there were all kinds of, stuff starting online that it had been a political thing, that I had been forced to do it. And I was like, and then people were coming up to me and telling me that, and I was like, I came up with both titles. There's no compliment. It's like, when someone comes up like, I hate your friend. I'm like, I get it, but that's my friend. So I have to say it was with the North American title, with The Six Loves, it is sometimes a little easier because you get, even with interviews, you can kind of talk about the six. But yeah, people have their favorites, but quite interestingly, sometimes they're on other sides of the Atlantic. But it was a lovely reason they wanted to change it. And I've been very lucky. This is the same team I had for The Palace, the book that you mentioned before, Brendan. And I've been with the same publishers in both Britain and North America since, I think, 2015 or 20. It's 10 years at this stage, and they've been very good to me, and I owe a lot to them. So I always like to listen to kind of the feedback coming, and sometimes they'll just be talking through ideas. Do we change this? Do we tweak this? And yeah, so that was it. It was more kind of the practicalities of it. So I hope, and also there's a little bit of me that just loves anyone giving the metaphorical middle finger to Henry VIII's ghost. So I didn't hit that aspect of it at all. That
was something Tracy and I kind of dug into about how we don't hate him enough when we talk about it, but
I do.
Good. I keep running into it. Maybe it's just me, because whenever I've brought it up, everybody's like, no, we all know he really, really sucked.
Yeah.
But he was interesting. I think that's the problem, is that
sure.
There's a lot of ink to spill, I should say. Well, blood to spill too, knowing him. But it's also very interesting, and I think people don't realize this with the publishing industry. You pitch a Tudor book,
right?
It's a lot easier than pitching a Stewart book.
Stewart book, right.
There are a lot of things in history that I've talked to historians where it's like, hey, I pitched this, and it's a super interesting story, but because it falls at this time period, people don't talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I interviewed Breeze Barrington, and she was talking about Restoration Court for her book.
Yeah, Breeze is great. Yeah.
And she was just like that, it's a hard pitch.
But she did it. Sorry to interrupt, Brendan, but Breeze Barrington, that book was on Mary of Modena, who's James II's wife, and the Glorious Revolution has got nothing. That's late 17th century. It really doesn't get anything. So she did really well with that.
It was brilliant.
It was, and also because, but this, yes, look, I sometimes, when you have someone like Breeze Barrington who absolutely knows their stuff inside out, and it's a fascinating story, it can happen. But there are also many times where, it will be tougher. And that will have been that, with this book, I think I worked a long time on the pitch and to make sure it was good, and I knew I had a good topic. But I also, what had helped was that I have worked with this team before, and the Palace had done well. So I think in that sense, that made it easier. But yes, the Stuarts, that's one of the reasons why I was so really, really excited when my American publishers had enough faith in it to make it a Christmas release. Because as you say, the Tudors can be an easier pitch in that way. So I've been incredibly lucky with this. And there was a fairly long-ish gap between it. Sort of 3/4 of the year between it coming out in Britain and Ireland and it coming out in North America. But I think the reception has been so positive for it that hopefully it contributes maybe even just a little bit to showing that the Stuarts can certainly earn their place in popular culture and popular history, because they're fascinating. They're just the right amount of demented.
With James I, I find there is a very easy, salacious way that you can do this, which is James, let's say his sexuality was somewhat in question, if not in question at all.
Sure.
And I think there's an easy way to just be salacious and this what it is, Whereas you tell the whole story of James here and you put him in context. And especially when it comes to sexuality, I think especially people who don't read history don't realize that it's hard, if not impossible, to actually know anyone's sexuality this far back. Yes, there are more who have question marks and you can look at some evidence, sure, but knowing positively whether or not somebody was straight, gay, all of these things, it's pretty difficult, if not impossible, to say, I know 100%.
Yeah, well, because you can't know it about people who are alive.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the things you have to stop with this, because because what is often done with history of anyone who had same-sex intimacy is historians have traditionally been put into a position where they can't say anything. They're stopped by questions before they get out of the gate. So are you saying he's gay? Oh, so you're saying he's bisexual. You have to label him with a modern label before you're allowed to move on with that. And I just thought that was in the way of proper historical investigation. If you have a letter from one man to another in which one of them is saying, I cannot wait to feel your thighs in my arms again, the question is settled. It's not platonic. I don't think that's me breaking the Kinsey scale with that revelation. When you have another one where he's saying, sweetheart, at the thought of your absence, I had to ride away from everyone today because tears streamed down my face. I want nothing more than to have you in my arms. They're not just bros. So I think what you do is you just write it. You write the evidence. He had sex with his wife. He also had sex with these men, and that's it. And in terms of it's very kind of you to say about the full story, Brendan, because that's actually what it is. And the real joy about being able to write about the men he was in love with, his remarkable marriage, and him, and to write, I think, hopefully without coyness or unnecessary self-sabotage about his sexuality, is that you get to restore the whole person. And sexuality is a part of a person. It's not the entirety of it. It's certainly not the entirety of him, but it does fundamentally shape his life and his role. And the real thrill for me was when I got to put it back and to allow it and all the sources and these very explicit, clear sources to shape the arc of his life. I hope I get to give the reader what I got, which is all of James. It's the entirety of him. And it's a man who fell in love with men and had sex with men and who cared very much for his wife. He was a gifted intellectual who was rabidly in favor of witch hunts at one point in his life. He was a keen biblical scholar who wrote filthy letters in his private life. And he was a devout Christian who drank too much and swore a lot. So I think all of that is the totality of the man. And if we can have a way of writing about the sexuality of the past in a way that isn't constantly trying to safeguard ourselves against criticism in the present or being too presentist, I think we will write better biographies in the future. And it's absolutely worth pointing out that there were ways they wrote to each other that were more affectionate than we might be within our own genders. There are men who I talk about in the book who I think have been misidentified as his lovers. But all you have to do is, I mean, if it walks like a duck and it quacks like a duck, it's not a cat when it comes to these letters. So I was just guided by the evidence in creating it. So no, I can't. I mean, I think I say at the very end of the book, if I was pushed and someone wanted one of the labels, I would say a bisexual with a strong preference to his own gender. But ultimately, the freeing thing was I just let what he wrote and what other people knew guide me. And the dead don't really owe us anything. They certainly don't owe us a label. So that's kind of how I was guided through it. It was a really refreshing, exciting way to write.
I love what you said there, because it's part of him, but it's not all of him. Because I think especially these conversations nowadays can become very reductive.
Yes.
And want to go straight to this. But I mean, especially when you look at, even if we're just looking at English monarchs, their sexuality is part of it, but it's very often not about who they love. It's about if they love somebody who's going to try and get above their station.
Yes, 100%.
And it's going to cause absolute chaos. Man, woman, doesn't matter. And that's kind of what we have with James right now. I want to go back to his childhood.
Sure.
Let me ask just a big question. Is there any way he was going to turn out normal? Considering his mother is Mary Queen of Scots, which we'll get into her, but with his upbringing, and if you could talk a little bit about how his childhood was, let's especially talk about his tutor.
Yeah.
Was there any way he was going to come out okay?
Very few of them did, but particularly him. I mean, look, I think some people often make the comparison to Elizabeth I, his predecessor in England, and they say, you know, her mother was executed, and there was very uncomfortable things happened in Elizabeth's adolescence with her absolutely heinous stepfather, Thomas Seymour. But Elizabeth did have a window, say from about 3 to... when did she 12, 13, she starts going back more regularly to court, so she's more in her father's orbit. But in those years, when she's in the countryside, she has staff that are devoted to her, and she has a safe environment for those 9 years, I think. James never really has that. Even that he has a governess, the Countess of Mar, who is absolutely devoted to him. And her nephews and her sons become his playmates. So there is a happiness element to it. But his tutor is George Buchanan, who is, as she mentioned, a pivotal figure here and a monstrous figure. I mean, a brilliant Protestant intellectual, a keen articulator of limited, we would say, constitutional monarchy, the right of the people to overthrow tyrants. But he's a cautionary lesson in that your ideology should never replace your humanity. And it very much does with him. He's horrific to James and takes real pleasure in beating him and humiliating him. And this myth is told in British history about a child called the Whipping Boy. And we're told that royal princes were never beaten and it was a servant chosen in lieu of them. That's a lie. That never existed. They did believe that if you spared the rod, you spoiled the child. And young princes in particular must learn to function through pain if they were going to lead their armies in battle. But even in that context, there are stories of people having to pull George Buchanan off James, that the beating was becoming so severe. And also Buchanan would teach him that his exiled mother was a harlot, that she'd murdered his father, that women were either morons or monsters. You know, it was and that all of his ancestors were tainted by their unlovely thirst for authority. So he is a really maligned figure. And James, well into adulthood, will suffer sort of nightmares about him. He'll talk about, at one point, there's a love letter between him and Robert Carr, and they've had a fight. And James basically says, the last person who spoke that horrifically to me was George Buchanan. So well into his 40s, George Buchanan is the reference point for emotional cruelty to James. So I don't know if anyone can come out of that unscathed. I mean, certainly if you look at the governess side, the Lady Mar side, he has a luxurious, loving childhood, but as we know from any case where someone is hurt, it just takes one snake in the grass to do it, and that was George Buchanan.
As you mentioned too, you know, most of them didn't come out normal, especially because he came out and you are the heir, you are the king, you are going to get this and that.
He was king at 13 months old. It's a really good point, Brendan, because he doesn't remember not being king, whereas a lot of other monarchs will remember what it was like. Elizabeth I is 25 when she becomes queen. James, like his mother Mary, and I think this is also part of her problem, is he has no conscious memory of not being monarch and all the dangers and all the privileges that come with it.
Well, and also no reference point for his mother Mary, Queen of Scots, because they spent no time together at all.
Blink and you miss it. Yeah, she's deposed and driven into exile when he's 13 months old, and she last sees him when he's 10 months old. He was moved to a countryside palace in Scotland called Stirling, which is beautiful. And she's overthrown in an uprising, and she flees to England, where she's under house arrest for the next 2 decades, and then is eventually beheaded for treason. And he never sees her again. So no, he has a theoretical concept of Mary. I sometimes say, though, Brendan, it's one of those things when you're working in a book and all of a sudden halfway through you're like, oh, this is really obvious. I probably should have clocked this first. But the moment in this book was realizing he's like a child of adoption, which is that Mary is his biological mother, but the Countess of Mar is the woman he thinks of as his mother, his governess, and he called her Lady Minnie, Minny. And I wonder if I can figure out what it was. Is it like a pet name? Or is it a colloquialism? So I eventually found a very dusty old dictionary of old Scots and Ulster Scots colloquialisms, and it turned out Minnie meant mommy. So he called his governess Lady Mommy. So he had a mother figure, which was his governess, but I think he was always torn about how he was supposed to feel about the absent mother, whose absence was because he'd been made king by her enemies. It's a very, very confusing place to be.
You highlight that, and it really, you just don't think about it, but his mother was a threat to him. his entire life as well, because if she came back, then what happens? If he's going to try and take over England, right, as the successor to Elizabeth, how does Mary? So not only does he not have his, biological mother, but this woman is also an existential threat to him at all times if she ever gets too close to him again. Listen, families are complicated enough, and then you add this into it. It's amazing that he didn't turn out to be a huge jerk a la Henry VIII, somebody like that.
Yeah, he could have been a lot worse. And actually, it's a great point, because I think with his mother, there were some things that Mary did in prison that I thought, oh, this is not great, that this will hurt him, and it's not helping her cause. And there was certainly at least a suggestion that she would have been prepared to use force to get herself back at his expense. So it's a very, very fraught and painful dynamic.
Now, I don't want to be completely negative about James, because there's, a lot of things going on here, but I think we should talk about whether he's when he's Scotland or when he comes to England, he was a good time. If you were going to hang out with James, you were going to have a hell of a time, weren't you?
Yeah. Hell of a hangover, but a hell of a time. Absolutely.
Also, you talk about it too, when he comes from Scotland to England, what's it kind of like for the English people, right? Now, this is in some ways kind of almost a foreign invader legally coming to take over the crown. And for those of you wondering how it happened, Tracy Borman's book, grab that. Read them both.
Yeah, it's an excellent book.
How do the English people see him when he's coming in? Are they kind of relieved that this is going to be a peaceful transfer? Yeah. The Scots are seen from the English side kind of as, shall we say, uncouth. So what do the English people think when he first shows up?
They initially are thrilled. Now, there's some that don't like the idea that it's Scottish, but many of them find him a refreshing change. Elizabeth is not overly popular, certainly not in some parts of the country. When she dies, she's seen as too conservative. And James is, he's in his 30s. He has a wife and children, heir spare. The crisis of the succession is over. There's stories that in the week after Elizabeth died, food prices quadrupled in England. People were so anxious about a war, and then it all proceeds very smoothly thanks to James and his allies in England. The British Isles are united under one royal family for the first time, and he is surrounded by popular adulation that he very quickly loses. Partly because he struggles with crowds. As he's getting older, he's becoming more and more unsettled with them. There are incidents where he seems to have what sounds very like a panic attack. His wife, Anna, is much more popular, and she can work a crowd, and so she kind of becomes the public face of the new regime, and she does a lot of heavy lifting for it. But she can't do it all. So the tidal wave of anti-Scottish xenophobia it gets louder and louder, or higher and higher, I suppose, in London. And there starts being plays that depict a king with a Scottish accent sort of being too close to men with a Scottish accent. There's his private life, his nationality is all woven together. Many people will have heard of the Gunpowder Plot launched by a hardline Catholic group to blow up James. And what a lot of people don't realise is that Guy Fawkes, he didn't just hate Protestants, he loathed the Scots. And he thought the idea of a Scottish King of England was an abomination. And that, James's great-grandfather, James IV, had launched an invasion in 1513 that is, to date, the largest army ever to invade English soil. And it was defeated, but it was seen by some in 1603, 1604, this is the House of Stuart winning us in a way they hadn't won us in 1513. This is the long game that they've played. So they're wallowing in sort of xenophobic angst at this. And in particular, they hate the idea of Britain being used as the national name. They do not like the idea of England and Scotland becoming Britain. They want England to stay as a separate thing. So he deals with a lot of unpopularity, really, from about 1604, 65. Part of it is because he can't work the crowd. Part of it is his private life. Part of it is his spending. A big part of it is his nationality.
I like that you bring up Anna, because she's kind of an unsung hero in this for me. And
I love her.
You point that out like I feel like James has a much rougher time without her.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Going back to Henry VIII, she reminds me of Catherine of Aragon, where whatever her husband is doing, she's not perfect or anything, but whatever her husband is doing, she seems to be seen kind of separately, and a lot of adulation for her, regardless of what's going on.
Yeah.
Is it just that, she just hit all the right points? Was she just easier to like overall?
Well, it's interesting. She loved that you compared her to Catherine of Aragon. She really liked her. She's sort of got Catherine of Aragon's self-belief, Anne Boleyn's charisma, Jane Seymour's sense, and Catherine Howard's desire for a good time. Catherine Howard's love for jewelry and partying she had. So she's very charismatic, and that's a big part of it. She knows a bit. She sort of reminded me of the late Queen Mother or Princess Diana, which is that they never looked bored in public. They always looked interested, and they took it very seriously, that when you were in public, you played the role. And Anna understood that, and she never looked bored, and she always looked invested. But you didn't cross Anna lightly. Steel dagger and a silk glove, as they say. And I think someone said she's loving and kind to those she cares for, and proud and terrible and unendurable to those she dislikes. So Anna could knock down and demolish reputations if they got in her way or in her family's way. And that's certainly in the book, these lives that she snapped. I became so Team Anna that I sort of thought they deserved the snapping. But she really, I do think, was his best ally.
I can't help but think when, you read books like this, you think about, who were they going to put in this position when they do the miniseries? Because obviously this needs to be a miniseries. And to me, she's one of those characters that seems made up when you write her out. Exactly what you're talking about. This is exactly what an actor wants, where this person can be so beloved, so charismatic, but also dangerous at the same time.
Yeah. She's the dream role to write or to play. I'm so glad you said that, Brendan. I loved her. And even when she was responding to someone like throwing a pebble at her by launching a heat-seeking missile at their life, I thought, well, you shouldn't have thrown the pebble then, should you?
She's the damn queen, for God's sake. Of course, I'm descended from Irish people, so we don't love the king and queen, but you know what
Sure.
So now, was his marriage to Anna what people would look at and say it was a sham? He had to do it, especially when you look at, there is a lot of overlap with James's favorites, especially early on. It seems like there's a few people going on at once.
It's a busy time.
Yeah, a little bit. So for Anna, was it a sham marriage? Was this something that he got talked into? Or was there actual real love there in whatever way you want to say it?
It's difficult. It's a great question, but it's difficult because they all were, and none of them were, by extension. So they married for the reasons that most people in their position married. And, did it really matter if he was in love with another man? He was probably as unhappy as if he'd been in love with another woman. There was no choice for it. In terms of being a sham, it was clearly consummated. There was a great deal of affection that grew there. It was not a great love match in the way their son Charles I's arranged marriage to Henrietta Maria of France was a great love match. I mean, that love, like many of them, it grew out obviously after the political wedding. But that was an all-consuming, really deep, long-lasting, happy marriage between those two. That's not what James and Anna had. They got on with it. And people will sometimes say, oh, poor her, like he preferred men. It's like, I'm sure if you sat Anne Boleyn down and were like, you have a choice between your husband and a gay guy, what would you take? I think she would be like, listen, it could not have gone worse for me with a straight guy, so I'll take what you're given. A gay husband sounds like a much safer bet. And in some ways, I mean, I'm being flippant, but that is true. So Anna's father, King Frederick II, and her mother, Queen Sophia, had a successful marriage, but a painful one, in that Frederick committed adultery left, right, and centre. There were mistresses and illegitimate children who had humiliated Sophia and threatened her children's position in society. And Anna was astute enough to realise that at least this way, that was not going to happen to her. And the one thing that she insisted on was that James's lovers would respect her. And as I talk about in the book, when one of them didn't, she set fire to his entire life. And again, I thought, fair enough.
All right, we could go on for hours. Like I could go through each of the 6 loves. I'm going to take Anna off the table. Of the other 5 left,
yes,
who was best for James?
Ooh.
If we were redoing this and we said, all right, we want James to be happy, which one of his favorites are you saying, this is the one?
Alexander Lindsay, no question. So a lot of times people say, who was the great love? And that's a harder question. Who was best for him, without doubt, was Alexander Lindsay. They were hunting companions in their late teens, and the relationship kicks off in James and Alexander's early 20s. Alexander is of them all, he is the one that we could be certain loved him when it was not in his best interests to do it. So that's the difficult thing about being king. Because when James was at risk during several plots and it looked like he was about to be ruined, Alexander risked his life to smuggle messages out for him. So we know that Alexander would have been there when the chips were down. He doesn't get involved in politics. He's loyal. He's a capable fighter. He offers to take over the royal bodyguard for him. And when the time comes, when they have to part ways for the good of the monarchy, it kind of breaks Alexander's heart a little bit, but he does it. He was just a very good, nice man. And in the late 16th century political world, finding a good, nice anyone is, I don't know, like finding a nugget of gold. So for me, Alexander Lindsay, without question, was the best for him. And it's a pity that there was just no long-term future given the world they lived in.
Well, I asked the first one, I got to ask the opposite. Who's the worst?
Oh, I mean, Huntley wasn't great. Huntley was...
Yeah, no, I thought that was going to be the one.
No, I don't know what Huntley was capable of romantically, but when he was accused of treason and then asked to spend the night alone with James, and the next morning James is like, he's innocent. I was like, I don't think that this was a night filled with talking, especially when James is like, everyone else leave. No, Huntley was sort of someone I think he had a very strong physical crush on, the strange, extraordinary affection, as it's called. And he made a lot of really bad decisions. I have to say, actually, probably, but he was younger then, I suppose, so Huntley maybe less so, and actually James, I think Robert Carr was probably the worst for him. So Robert was the great love between sort of 1607 and 1615, so 8 years. And I would say the last 3 years of that, Robert became a sort of a monster of privilege and drunk in his own fame, and James let him get drunk in it. And I think he allowed Robert to actually do quite a lot of damage in those years. So I would say Robert Carr was the worst.
So while we're asking about this, I'm going to do some magical time traveling with you. I'm going to send you back in time.
Sure.
You can talk to any one person from the book for an hour. Now, I am going to say, I'm taking James and Anna off the table. That's too easy. It's too easy. 1 hour, and they'll tell you the truth. So if this is somebody who is known for being a huge liar, they're going to tell you the absolute truth no matter what you ask.
Okay.
Who's it going to be?
It might be George Villiers, the Duke of Buckingham at the end, because I would be really, I think I'd be interested partly because the impact of his looks and his charm. I'd be really interested to see, would I end up having that kind of really high opinion of him that a lot of people who knew him seem to have, that doesn't quite translate onto the page. It's going to be an hour and just going for a few drinks. It'd probably be Alexander Lindsay. He used to enjoy sneaking out for a whiskey. And it might be quite enjoyable to just... Actually, maybe, do you know what? Yeah, maybe Alexander Lindsay, because I think it would be really lovely, because he was at the heart of the Scottish court. And a lot of some of those figures, we don't have as much evidence for, sort of the other big political players. And I'd love to sit him down and be like, what is so-and-so like? And what was it like with the raid? And what was it like with the battles? Yes, no, Alexander Lindsay. Do you know what? George can wait. Someone else can talk to him. I'll go for Alexander.
See, I'm cheat a little bit, because I would do Mary, Queen of Scots, because there are so many what ifs.
Write your own check at that point after, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just so many what ifs of, hey, by the way,
she has to tell the truth.
Exactly.
Sorry. Yeah.
And that's the big thing, is if you were just sitting there and she could just be, I'm the queen, I won't answer any of your questions. But if she's got to tell the truth, there's at least 100 questions right off the top of your nobody's going to be able to know unless you tell us what actually happened.
Yeah, if she just turns around, she's like, I 100% killed my husband. And burst, essentially when you watch Chicago, that song Cell Block Tango, he had it coming. That's what Mary would just be singing in your face. Because, if she did it, I kind of get it.
Now, did your opinion of James change between when you started this and when you went? Because I think... And tell me if I'm wrong, I think the opinion of James right now is that he was just kind of a drunk, a party goer, and you can blame so much of what happens. For those of you who don't know what happens, look up what happens to his children, but you can blame so much on him because he wasn't very kingly, per se.
Yeah.
How did you go in thinking about James, and did it change by the time you were done?
Very much so. I think I had an idea of him as a little bit ridiculous. Important, but ridiculous. And... I didn't think... he did drink too much, certainly by the end of his life. There's a problematic relationship with alcohol. I was in awe of him, actually. He's not a cuddly character. And the flaws can be seen from space. They're enormous with him. It's not a hagiography. It's not an attempt to make him a saint. I'm not his champion. I'm just his chronicler. But to be able to hold together what he held together, to do what he did, and to die on the throne and in his bed is remarkable. And to prevent, when you look at kind of the litany of bad luck and disasters that befell his ancestors and some of his descendants, he was a consummate survivor. And he was a believer in absolute monarchy, but he was a believer in peace above and beyond that. So absolute monarchy was the preference. It was not a prerequisite. So if it meant keeping peace by getting along with people he didn't get along with, then he would do it. So I had a lot more time for him. And his determined push against populism, I think, took spine. And I think some of that came from his private life. I think he had to swim against the tide a little bit. I don't think he's in the running to be our nicest monarch, but he's nowhere near the worst. And I don't think he was a bad one. In the final analysis, and as in all things, it's not damnation or salvation when it comes to your reputation. It's balancing things. And as I say, the demerits are huge. But I think in the end, he was a lot more impressive than I had given him credit for.
I think one of the things, you just mentioned it too, he was peace-loving. And I think especially when you're looking at English kings specifically, it's easy to be loved if you're a warmonger who lives.
Yeah.
And wins. And yet with James, he did put peace first, even if he was going to take a hit, that brands him a coward. And then, while even you said, Elizabeth was not necessarily completely beloved by the end, she was an institution. Like one of those politicians that left a mark, whether positive or negative, how you look at it. It's almost kind of like following Henry V. Right. There's going to be a step down and people are going to blame you for it almost.
Yeah, of course. And I think, there was always going to be, with any very, very popular monarch, that is always a risk. And also in James's case, Elizabeth, the longevity was another difficult thing because Elizabeth was monarch for 45 years. There was a whole generation that knew no one as monarch but her. She was the monarchy for a lot of people. And that was a tough act to follow. Whereas in Scotland, that's not how people saw his mother. So that wasn't as tricky for him. But look, I think the peace thing's a huge thing, Brendan. I'm cognizant too that there are probably some people screaming at this, but what about the witch hunts? They weren't very peaceful. And they are, chapter 8 of the book is about the witch hunts. And they are more complicated, no less tragic, and somehow even more horrifying than I thought going into it. And when you have someone like James who enthusiastically supports some of them, intervenes to shut down others, and is ambivalent about a third group of them, it becomes somehow even more frightening. So I think, peace in an early modern context, we're saying here, it's war. It's talking about war. The law was a bloody thing in the early modern period, and James's hands are no less stained with it than many of his contemporaries, and that's important to point out. What is interesting as well is with the witch hunts is a good example of it, but generally with conflict and rebellions or repressions of the people throughout this period, the figures are often wildly off. I was surprised that the number of arrests in Scotland were proportionally so much higher than they were in England, even before James became king. And there are different reasons I discuss in the book. But what I was really surprised by was some of the areas throughout Europe where the witch hunt, where I would never have thought the witch hunts were as big as they were to become. So to give by way of an example, between the 1560s when James was born, and the 1720s when they sort of stuttered to their exhausted finale, there are 1,500 arrests for witch hunts in Scotland. There are 10,000 in the same period in Switzerland, which just blew my mind. I don't know why I thought Switzerland was, maybe it's sort of the reputation for neutrality, but the period in which he lived was one in which there were many, many kinds of violence, and he did participate in some of the worst kinds of them. However, in terms of the tens or if not hundreds of thousands who would have died in some of the wars he was pushed to get involved in, he did not do that.
All right, I want to go off on a little bit of tangent here.
Sure.
Do you get time to read history just for fun? Do you have any recommendations, or do you have any friends with books coming out that you want to recommend? Obviously, Tracy Borman, The Stolen Crown.
Yeah.
Any others, your favorites, or some coming out that you want people to know? If you love my book, go read these.
Oh, I've probably drawn a blank. Actually, in terms of reading for fun, this is not a friend's book. I actually don't know this author. He's the professor of Egyptology at Cambridge. But I read a book called The Last Dynasty, or Dynasty in America, and it's about the Ptolemies and Ptolemaic Egypt. And it was absolutely fantastic. So I will never write a book in ancient Egypt. I don't have the expertise, but I love reading them. And I try, I suppose, as much as possible to read for fun. Sometimes, yes, when you're researching, you're a little bit exhausted by the end of the day. But The Last Dynasty was one that just absolutely consumed me. I mean, I was completely blown away by it. So if you love ancient history, that's a really good one. And yeah, obviously an absolutely shameless second plug for The Stolen Crown by Tracy Borman, because it is a fantastic, fantastic book.
Okay, last question for you, Gareth. There are people out there, the poor misguided souls I always talk about, that they think history was a class I took in high school. It bored the hell out of me. Why would I read that in my free time? If I sat one of these people in front of you and they said, Gareth, why should I read your book? What are you going to say?
First of all, you don't have to. And second of all, if you know your interests, stick with them. But thirdly, if it was a dodgy class, then don't let the rest of your entertainment life suffer because of a subpar teacher or subpar curriculum. I hope that this is a book that lovers of history will really enjoy. I also, above it all, would say I hope that this is a book that people who love a good story will enjoy, because I think history is an important storytelling in our culture, and this story is it is full of everything that you could want: stabbings, passion, assassination, trips to a brothel, places on fire, a world changing, and more plots than you could shake a stick at. So it's got what you want for a dramatic reading. And also, you know, some real tragedies. The witch hunts, the downfall of Mary Queen of Scots, the drama of the gunpowder plot. There's no boring moment in James's life. So I hope that the book does that justice.
Gareth, it absolutely does, in my opinion. I think it's wonderful. Thank you so much to come on and talk about it.
No, thank you, Brendan. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And that's it for this episode. Gareth, thank you so much. The Six Loves of James I, or if you're in the UK, Queen James. Either way, get the book. It's fantastic. In the meantime, hit us up Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Until next time, nerds, stay cool.